The Brooklyn Nets suddenly have a 10-game winning streak, are second in the NBA and the Eastern Conference, and more impressively, ranked 9th in defensive rating. They are using a creative but simple and effective switching scheme that focuses on their strengths and avoids their weaknesses. We are going to dive deep into the defensive scheme that Jacque Vaughn has been using and how they force their opponents into bad possessions and tough shots. The switching revolution really started with the Rockets when they faced the Warriors, where they designed their system to literally switch everything. Here, Rivers switched with Chris Paul, forces a deflection and turnover on the back screen. They would switch off-ball actions and on-ball actions on the split cuts, both on the strong side and weak side. Leads to a one-on-one Clay post-up against Chris Paul that is a miss, not the Warriors' beautiful offensive flow. This also bled into the Cavaliers' defensive system, where they would basically switch everything except Kevin Love, trying to slow down the Warriors' attack and force really tough contested shots. And of course, both the Warriors and the Celtics did a ton of switching in last year's finals, with the Warriors trying to make Jason Tatum and Jaylen Brown one-on-one players and force them to help, and the Boston Celtics switch everything system with length that tried to again slow down the Warriors' attack and use creative switching both on and off the ball. An example of this is on this drive from Clay, where normally Horford would stay with him in the past. When Clay drives here, Tatum now steps up and takes the drive. Horford then peels back onto Draymond and allows Tatum to contest the pull-up from Clay. The Nets are the number 1 team in the NBA in defense when it comes to forcing post-ups, and number 2 in isolations, right behind the Boston Celtics, meaning they're trying to take away your best plays and best actions and force you to play a one-on-one basketball, which also leads to a simpler defensive coverage when the ball is in only one player's hands or in isolation post-ups. And Chris Paul talked about this at length on the Old Man and the Three podcast. I've included clips, link for that full podcast in the description below.
One of the top teams in post defense. And the reason is because when you're switching, you're on high alert that the guy in the post is probably in a mismatch, right? So if I got switched on anybody or whatnot, we had principles. So when you catch the ball in the post, it might be take 1 hit, take 2 hits, spin them. Now you locked up, right? You spin them baseline, ain't got nowhere to go. With the Clippers, our offense was so potent. Like we was just nice, like clicking. Who gave us problems, Bugs?
Teams that switch.
Golden State. Our offense with the slip screen and going to get JJ and threes, every time we played against any other team, we killed them with that. But when we played against Golden State and they switched screens and did all this stuff, we couldn't run none of our stuff. Fast forward to me being in Houston, never forget, we played Minnesota in the first round, right? And it got funny to our team. Our team would like be out there on the court, we'd be laughing because the other teams would be pissed. They would be pissed because they out there arguing. They're like, man, pass the ball. You ain't doing it. And we laughing like, yeah, because all that stuff y'all done ran 90% of the season, it's not working no more.
Now, the biggest difference between the Nets and other teams that switch 1 through 5 is the Nets are only switching ball screens. No matter what players are involved, if a ball screen's set, then they will switch that action. So here you get Giannis getting a ball screen with Kyrie switching onto him. Good active hands forces the turnover. With length on the floor like Simmons and Claxton, even when they switch and it gets blown a little bit, they still have good active hands that force tough passes. Here we get a switch with Claxton on DeJounte Murray. A little bit of action after it, but ultimately ends up in a one-on-one attack, a stagnant attack against Claxton, who's one of the better defenders in the NBA this season in ISOs. Another example here where he switches on to Bogdanovic, and what the Nets are doing with this ball screen action is loading and sitting in the gaps or showing at the next defender. So here O'Neal shows in the gap, little stunt, one-on-one D from Claxton forces a tough miss. And these gap helps do prevent, when any mistakes are made, any drive. So here O'Neal, gap help stunts, allows Claxton to recover, get back, forces the contested pull-up. Another example of that here with KD sitting at the nail, letting the guys behind him know, hey, I'm at the gap, you need help if I can't get there. He recovers, forces a tough contested 2. They also like to load in gaps, especially against players like Giannis in transition, where they kind of form a wall like we've talked about extensively with Giannis before, with 2 to 3 players and bodies in front of them, no driving lanes, and this kind of helps with their poor point of attack defense that allows them to keep the drives in front. Now when the Nets do switch, they do something a little creative off the ball. They kick out switch, so you can see initial switch from Simmons and KD with Giannis involved. The ball gets swung to the second side. The ball screen from Lopez means Kyrie is now switching onto Brook Lopez. Normally would roll into the post here. Nick Claxton's guarding Carter on the perimeter, Kyrie on Lopez in the post for the time being. As Lopez rolls into the lane, you can see Kyrie looking at KD saying, hey, you're next, you're next. So what they do is they have Kyrie rotate to the next weakest defender. So Kevin Durant will take Lopez, O'Neal slides onto Giannis, and Kyrie goes to the opposite wing. So they essentially keep matchups with KD would be in rim protection, O'Neal in help. Another example here against the Cavs. Kevin Love rolls, Kevin Durant takes him, Kyrie goes to the next player in the corner or the weakest link away from the ball. Warren and O'Neal then switch the final ball screen, keeping O'Neal a good wing defender on the ball. An example here against the Hawks has Okongwu rolling, so Kevin Durant, the low help, is going to step up and take him. It may seem like Kyrie would go to the next player, but they want to focus on the weakest link. So Jalen Johnson's the furthest away from the ball, a 24% three-point shooter versus AJ Griffin, 36%. And actually in the corners, Jalen Johnson, 16%. So you want to leave him open, have Kyrie recover to the weakest link opposite, ends up in another tough contested 2 against Royce O'Neal for the block. We'll talk about off-ball actions later, but they initially will not switch these actions with Kevin Durant staying on his man. This leaves Claxton on the ball screen here, switching with Kyrie. Now on the roll here, you're going to see Royce O'Neal off the corner, switch onto the big. Kyrie then is going to rotate to his man in the corner, keeping it simple. And the Nets load up an ISO behind them, leaving some of the weaker shooters open, like Scotty Barnes and players that they want to try to beat them from the perimeter. Another example of this switch here with Claxton switching onto the roll, Cam Thomas lifting up on this baseline drive. Now Claxton is a low help. Of course, with any switching defense, some mistakes can be made. Here, Curry gets switched on an empty ball screen. TJ Warren should go and kick him out earlier, but he doesn't. Ben Simmons uses his length and forces a tough over-the-top pass that allows an in-air or a scram switch with TJ Warren matching up in the post, leads to a deflection steal. Now these empty ball screens can give them problems. Here, a quick switch with Kyrie and John Collins. They throw the ball in the post quickly. Collins goes up for a quicker finish and makes a layup. Same game, next play, they get Kyrie switch onto Collins again. This time, Claxton recognizes it and does an early switch and kicks out Kyrie. So now when the ball screen's set, Claxton is now matched up on DeJounte Murray. A good on-ball defender who does a good job of not fouling here, keeping his hand straight up using his length. Murray misses the pull-up and the Nets go on to win the game. The Nets are one of the better teams at IQ and off-ball switching. Here, Claxton's matched up with Corey Joseph, and the cross-match Kyrie's matched up with Marvin Bagley. Typically, Bagley would have the advantage here. So when Corey Joseph tries to get him in the post, Bagley, instead of just passing it and going into the post, decides to flip it. The Nets recognize, oh, Claxton's right next to Bagley, Corey Joseph's not in a scoring position, let's just switch back this action, and look at Corey Joseph's reaction here, recognizing that, well, the advantage is completely gone. And what happens is they end up kind of flowing into a secondary action and still trying to post up Marvin Bagley, but now against Nick Claxton, and it just doesn't go that well. Another example of, honestly, a maddening play where teams don't really understand how to attack switching. Kevin Durant switches onto Bogdanovic in baseline out of bounds, and then the player that they switched with, Joe Harris, now is in ball screen defense, so they just switch back and keep the same matchup. And teams do this all the time, where they'll just go and re-ball screen or go ball screen again. The Nets can just switch and switch back whenever they feel like and keep the advantage, and just keep their defensive mindset of, okay, we'll just keep the same matchups and not allow you to do what you want to do. Now, all this switching does lead to some offensive rebounding issues, which they're already prone to begin with. The Nets have improved in this area in improving their defensive rebounding rate, but they still have only jumped from 29th to 24th. If they could get that even higher, their defense will jump into possibly a top 5 position. Even though they give up a ton of offensive rebounds, these haven't always resulted in points, so they've done a pretty good job limiting their opponents when they get offensive rebounds. One of the techniques that they will use, since they're a smaller, scrappier team, is almost like a defensive back when the ball is thrown from a quarterback to a wide receiver, where they get their hands up through the catching pocket and kind of punch it through and get the deflection that way. Some of the basic rules for switching teams, and in particular this Brooklyn Nets team this year, is no screen, no switch. So if there isn't contact on any screen, then there is not a switch taking place. This is most notable when teams will try to have slips or, fake screen and cut to the basket, or set like a ghost screen where you kind of fake the ball screen and pick and pop. To avoid any confusion, the goal is to not switch this action. So if there is no contact on a screen, even if it's a pick and pop, the goal is to keep the matchups intact. This prevents any sort of mistakes and easier things that can happen on the ball. And this is a difference between like them and the Celtics switching system, where the Celtics are just going to switch everything regardless. One of their help principles is basically whoever sucks at shooting on the other team, their goal is to help off of them. So you see like Jalen Johnson in the corner here. We mentioned his corner 3 struggles. Any bigs that are spaced, you'll usually see Claxton or Kevin Durant helping off of them, even when they're not supposed to. In like the strong side corner, you'll see Kevin Durant help off of a wing when he's not supposed to and just rotate and basically keep Durant, Claxton, Simmons in paint protection. And you'll see guards help off of corner or weaker 3-point shooters. This doesn't always work. Obviously, it gives up an open corner 3 that can go in, but the goal is to help first. Unlike other teams that switch basically every action, like the Celtics and the Warriors at times, you'll see the nets stay attached on these off-ball actions like pin downs, flare screens, back screens, where you'll see Royce O'Neal shoots the gap here on this instead of switching with Kevin Durant. This keeps Durant on Siakam. When they go for this little fake handoff here, Kyrie goes under, so now KD can stay one-on-one in his matchup and be the best wing defender on Siakam. Another example here, as I said, this basic pin down, Royce O'Neal locks and trails on a good shooter. This almost turns into like a drop coverage ball screen where they're trying to force him into the paint. Now it gets tougher with players like Curry and Mills and Kyrie defending off-ball actions. They can get caught on these off-ball screens and catch and shoot threes, but it's worth giving that up versus the alternative of maybe giving up a slip, which is basically slipping to the rim. So again, switching teams, you'd see a lot of times, anytime a screen is set off the ball, you'll see a slip to the rim in between the switch, and that's where it can get real complex, where teams will add after timeout specials that will pick on, weaker defenders and set up this designed action where you get like a flare slip to the rim, or you'll get a slip after a pin down screen, or just something that ends up being wide open because a blown coverage allows an easy layup. Now, this doesn't mean that the Nets system is perfect. Sometimes you'll see a little bit of confusion between, like, should we switch, should we not switch? A slip can create that kind of hesitation and doubt. But in general, they do a good job staying attached. And if there is a screen like for like Kyrie and Sumner in this situation, they will switch that. So if like Kyrie and Curry's man screen for each other, they'll switch that action. They'll try to keep the matchups intact. Otherwise, though, because they don't want like Kyrie matched up on a big, or Kyrie matched up on a player like Siakam. But if the players involved are like Harris and O'Neal, they would likely switch those actions. Harris has a pretty good reputation for defending the post and being a strong physical player, defending one-on-one. And like I said, the one-on-one situations are easier to help off of. Players like Simmons, Kevin Durant, Claxton, if those are involved in ball screen or off-ball actions, that's like an automatic switch for them. Simmons is obviously one of the better ball handler defenders in the NBA. Kevin Durant, Claxton are also two of the better defenders at the rim. So keeping those guys in those matchups is important. And that is how the Brooklyn Nets defense works. Stay attached off the ball, switch when there's a ball screen no matter who's involved. If a guard is on a big, they run a kick-out switch on the weak side, leaving that open and forcing one-on-one and isolation play. Thank you so much for watching this breakdown. I hope you enjoyed it. If you made it this far, please consider subscribing or supporting through Substack.